Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Arcade Fire album, Reflektor. Grammy Award-winning, famed Montreal rock band, considered by many to be indie rock kingpins, known for their lavish instrumentation, epic anthemic songwriting, and very emotive vocals from front couple Win Butler and Regine Chassagne. Since the mid-2000s, the band put out 3 full-length studio albums that I and many other people consider to be great. For years, the band has been celebrated as this group that just pushes things further, reaches higher, just has this massive amount of ambition, and I was pretty excited to see that playing out into this next record of theirs, Reflektor, an LP that looked fantastic before its release, that looked fantastic on paper. We're talking about a pretty interesting cover here, a double album, James Murphy of LCD Sound System and DFA Records fame taking the reins on production for a lot of these tracks. And on the lead single, the title track to this album that was released months in advance of this LP, fantastic song, a track that embraced the tenets of disco and is one of my favorite tracks of this year. This single and all the other elements that I just mentioned added up into me being super excited for this album. And overall, I gotta say, Arcade Fire does go in some kind of direction with this thing. I do feel like this is a more groove-oriented record for Arcade Fire. I think this is a slightly poppier record for Arcade Fire, though still very epic and long-winded. I do think there are some really strong lyrical themes running throughout this thing, maybe a little bit more obvious than what was happening on The Suburbs, but despite all of that, I feel like this record still fell short of my expectations. I want to start off with the lyrics on this thing because I think they are my favorite piece of the recipe that Arcade Fire tries to pull together. You have a myriad of different song subjects and just one-liners on here that deal with troubled love, heaven, hints toward Greek mythology with Orpheus and Eurydice, with songs that essentially talk about seduction, attraction. And a lot like on The Suburbs, there are a number of tracks on here that sort of deal with being an outsider, being on the fringe. I feel like the first song to kind of hit with that message is We Exist. A track that lyrically, to me, feels like the band is singing about being this smaller group against this greater power, sort of having to face or having to live in the world of a majority that maybe morally or ideologically they don't really agree with. And this majority is trying to ignore them and count them out. Similar themes sort of run through tracks like Joan of Arc and Normal Person. And then there's Flashbulb Eyes, another track on here a lot like Reflektor, deals with this current vanity age or fame, with Win making reference to the old wives' tale that when you get your picture taken, it steals your soul. And then there's Porno, where you seem to have this male narrator singing to a female, in a way kind of apologizing or just being upset about these two living in a world where they just don't see eye to eye with the sexual standards or what constitutes sexy. Lyrically, I feel like Reflektor has a lot to offer on the surface and on a more subtle level too. Maybe there are a few hooks like on songs such as You Already Know and Afterlife, where the lyrics are a little redundant or overly simplistic, like You Already Know, or Scream and Shout Till We Work It Out. But that's it. It's musically where I feel like this album sort of fails to entertain. Instead of embarking on another group of immaculately layered songs, Arcade Fire instead delivers a musical jumble, a stylistic hodgepodge of different genres across the length of Reflektor, without much attention or care toward whether or not all of these sounds are flowing together well as a record, and a lot of the time I don't even really feel like they're putting that much care into whether or not they're doing some of these genres justice. I've already said I like the song Reflektor, which obviously goes into a bit of a disco direction, and then there is We Exist, which feels kind of new wave influenced, and that's a song that I like too. It's got a very mid-paced, easygoing dance music beat, a warm synth bass line, some shimmering guitars. It feels like a very moody nocturnal take on the instrumental to Madonna's Like a Virgin. But the tune of the song is great, and a lot like Reflektor, Arcade Fire manages to take this epic anthemic feel of their music, draw it out against a very hypnotic groove, and just progress the song with different layers of instrumentation, keep things engaging and keep things entertaining in the process. Then there is Normal Person, where it feels like Arcade Fire is trying to play with the idea of this being a bit of a live recording or something, thanking people for coming out and opening the singing line of the track, asking them if they like rock and roll music. And while this track does sound rock and roll instrumentally, there's kind of an awkwardness to how the instrumentation links up, and it feels like there's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek vibe to the way the music is being played. Of course, the song lyrically sort of takes shots at society, and bringing that together with a weird portrayal of a popular music genre, I can't really think of anything that is more Talking Heads. Also, the big distorted chorus and the wailing lead guitars, as well as the faint, distorted, and kind of buried horns in the background of this thing. It's a great track. It's very well put together, even if it is kind of fuzzy and just really overmodulated, which I'm sure was intentional. There's also the very heavy, dramatic, and driving song, It's Never Over, Hey Orpheus, another favorite of mine on here. Hey Orpheus! The groove on this thing is hypnotic. It just captures me, and I'm like, yes! I am so happy James Murphy is doing production on this, because this is one of the moments where his influence is most apparent. This song and the next track on here, Porno, which is a bit of a subdued track with a bit of electronic drums in the background, some synthesizers playing a very big role. Yes, there is a bit of a new wave, post-punk, minimal synth influence here, but it's very stripped back, sort of reminds me of moments from the LCD Sound System's last full-length LP, tracks like I Can Change or Somebody's Calling Me. And while I think the production is decent, I'm more enamored with the message of the song and the tune of it more than anything. Sadly, that's about it for highlights for me. I only like about half of the songs on this album, and many of the other tracks here I just find to be half-hearted imitations of different genres that Arcade Fire just wanted to pursue on this LP for no other reason than to do them. Like the song Flashbulb Eyes, I just don't find anything entertaining or good about hearing Win Butler moan over this sort of stripped back dance hall beat that is kind of underwhelming. There are some echo effects over his voice and a lot of the instrumentation here, and it's really turned up too much to the point where the song doesn't really read. It feels like a dub reggae nightmare. And then there's the song Here Comes the Night, where it feels like the vocals are really too distorted, as well as the bass, and they're presented so upfront and in your face in a way where it's kind of claustrophobic, something that I feel like works for an LCD Sound System song, but doesn't do this tune too much justice. I do like the song here, the melody. The piano playing is pretty quaint, but again, I feel like we're delivered an instrumental here that is just not really a flattering portrayal of a Caribbean style of music. Not only that, but I feel like Arcade Fire continues this faux live feel on this track, and it results in some of the instrumentation feeling way less explosive than it should be. Like the outro, where they really kind of kick up the tempo, all the instrumentation is going incredibly fast, you have these guitars strumming very quickly, and the song here only ends up feeling like sort of a dull drone rather than an exciting explosion of feeling and instrumentation. You have the song you already know with this quirky, playful, silly rock bass line and this drum beat that kind of feels like it could back a song from the Grease soundtrack. Groove-wise, the song just feels really stiff and kind of corny. The only thing this song is missing is a group of backup singers going, wow, wow, ah. Then there's the track Joan of Arc, which starts off with this distorted, fast punk rock intro, but then kicks into this slowed down tempo that delivers a guitar riff and a drum beat that feels like a slow motion version of a Sweet song. It's got a hard rock, glam rock vibe to it, but none of the joy, fun, or viscera. The track just feels like bad emulation with very, very little attention to musical detail. And not only that, but as the song progresses, a growing problem is that it doesn't stay interesting as the band starts to draw this slow rock beat out longer than it really should be. awful sound, sort of an underwhelming ballad which has some dissonant strings that kick in and really sort of brings home the title of the song. But then the second half of this track, instead of being underwhelming, is sort of a slightly insipid, explosive, feel-good folk rock opera that just does not vibe with me all too well. Then there is Supersymmetry, the closer on here, which I don't even know what Arcade Fire was going for on this track. An incredibly anticlimactic closer with some sequenced drums, some synthesizers, and I feel like the rush of instrumentation and the experimental last 6 or 5 minutes of this track are more interesting than the tune itself, because Wynn's and Regine's vocals are so buried and so comatose that the song isn't even really entertaining. So in short, I did not dig this album as much as Arcade Fire's previous LPs. Was it what they said? No. The lyrics on this thing are solid. Was it the tunes necessarily? Only a few of the melodies and the tunes and the songs on here I felt were unlikable. The problem is Arcade Fire wanted to make this overblown double disc album and ended up neglecting flow in a huge way, cohesion, musical cohesion between the songs. And for Arcade Fire, the sound of these songs was incredibly unimpressive too, even with James Murphy being credited as a producer on this album. Historically, the let's try to sound like this song and let's try to sound like this band and let's try to do that hook, that formula works really well for James Murphy, but it did not work out for Arcade Fire on this album. There are 2 new wave songs on here and a few tropical songs on here and a few disco-oriented songs on here, a bit of rock and roll, a bit of Afrobeat, and they only end up doing some of it justice. I'm feeling a strong 5 on this thing. Transition. But if you've given this LP a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, Arcade Fire, Reflektor, forever.